Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Faust, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Barrax Company. Today, I'd like to welcome you to our very next episode of the Barrax Podcast. I spoke with Judson Garrett, Associative Director for the Johns Hopkins University's Center for Innovative Leadership. We had an amazing conversation, and I hope you all enjoy. Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of the Barrax Podcast, on which we have Judson Garrett. How you doing?
Wonderful, Mark. Great to be here with you.
Really appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So I'd like to hop right into it. Can we first talk about, your early career? Right now you're doing work at Johns Hopkins, entrepreneurship, leadership stuff. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you got started. Maybe we can start at undergrad.
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Well, many moons ago, I was finishing up high school and I dreamed of racing bicycles across Europe. And I went to Arizona to seek fame and fortune on a bike. Unfortunately, I learned that I was great in Maryland, not so great in a bigger pond. So I learned a lot through that experience, but I really found that a lot of the skills that I developed through cycling transferred into education when I really started to focus on what I cared about, which at the time was philosophy and political science. But having that sort of self-motivation and that discipline led me to come back to Maryland, finish up my undergrad at University of Baltimore, studying government and public policy. But it was then when I realized that I wanted to continue with more education that I thought I have missed a lot along the way, because I was really focused on athletics. And so I went to St. John's College in Santa Fe. We also have a campus here in Annapolis, Maryland, that is a great books program. And I learned about ancient Greek philosophy through the Enlightenment, into the American founding, into the 20th century, a whole range of ideas, not just philosophy, but mathematics, science, art, literature, theology. So it was kind of a history of ideas that brought me to a place where I started teaching. And I really enjoyed teaching because it helped me sort of clarify my own ideas while helping other people sort of catch fire maybe a little bit earlier than I did, in a way that was hopefully allowing them to have more of a voice in their own learning. And then through that experience, I developed a real interest in design thinking, which then led me to entrepreneurship.
Cool. So I find it really interesting. You started racing bikes and athletics, and then you talked about that got you into philosophy.
Yeah.
So how exactly did those two dots connect?
I had a great professor at the University of Arizona, and I'll have to admit I spent a lot more time riding my bike than going to class. But the one class I did go to was on Greek mythology. And he was so impressive in that it wasn't a straight lecture. And he was wonderful at sharing narratives and stories and making connections across disciplines in a way that if you found this interesting, he would have another story, maybe from another time, a different culture, that helped you see sort of the common human element and helped me start to think about where I was in the world and maybe what I wanted to do. Or in a lot of ways, I just wanted to be kind of like him, because he seemed to know what he knew what he knew, but he wasn't challenged or he wasn't upset by new ideas. And he's teaching a freshman class that every year new kids are coming in, sort of have their own ideas. They're reading, the Iliad for the first time or something else. And he's happy to take on those questions. And I found that in my life, that oftentimes it wasn't the content that really drove me in a direction, but it was finding good people to work with or somebody that I knew I could learn from. And even just his disposition and his demeanor made me think that going further with education would make me happier.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the biggest questions that intrigued you the most at that time?
Yeah, I think for me, it was understanding that all of our ideas have sources. Whether we're aware of it or not, we carry around with us a whole host of ideas. Many of them are just given to us, right? They're based on authority that we had as a young person. Some of them might just be a kind of idea that it was the only time we thought about it. That was the first idea that occurred to us. So we just ran with that and it worked most times. Then third category would be what I would call scientific knowledge, where it's something that you started to think and experiment with and then demonstrate to yourself. And in that, I I found that going further with my education allowed me to think through not just what I believe, but why I believe that. And that helped me encounter new ideas with, I think, humility and an open mind. But it also made me want to go out in the world and hopefully leave it a little bit better than I found it.
So what would you say testing your own ideas what was your foundational structure? Did you have anything, aside from the athletics, maybe some religious background or what other influences, maybe a grandparent, I don't know. Where did you find that those ideas that took you through life up until the time that you started to discover this new professor of yours?
I think probably one key idea that I came across was in political science. We spent a lot of time, obviously, in an American university studying the American founding, thinking through those ideas and how they either were consistent or transformed throughout American history, times when different groups wanted to have a voice, and the idea that all men are created equal meant a specific thing at a specific time, and then it sort of opened up as we had different views or different voices. My father graduated from high school in 1955 in Charleston, South Carolina. So that was the year of the second Brown v. Board decision, which said, unfortunately, it used the unfortunate phrase, all deliberate speed, in talking about knocking down separate but equal and arguing for equality and integration. So he experienced Jim Crow. He graduated at a time when it was under transformation. And then he was a first generation limited income student who really worked hard to further himself and establish his family. But I know that he was operating in a world where other people didn't have that same opportunity, even though they might work hard or they might work harder. And I felt that increasingly personally, the more that I understood the history behind that and understood that I had benefited from that and the privilege that I enjoyed because I got to go to Catholic school, private school as a result of his success, and being able to think through maybe what I might have as an obligation to society. And I was at Catholic school where I very much enjoyed the questions that were being asked. I wasn't always satisfied with the answers, and so philosophy allowed me to revisit some of those questions in a way that gave me a chance to hear what other people throughout history thought and then think through what I thought myself.
Right. What were some of your favorite philosophers or maybe mentalities, frameworks?
So there are two that I probably still read for pleasure, and that would be Plato and Nietzsche. I kind of, like I mentioned, I started with the American founding. I found myself going backwards in history. I would go to some of the voices that influenced the founding, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and then realized that they were part of a bigger conversation that I didn't know, and I wanted to be a part of that conversation. So I kept going backwards into the medieval period, people like Aquinas, Augustine, and then finally the ancient Greeks, Plato, Aristotle. Plato resonated with me because he never used his own voice. He had a protagonist, Socrates, the person that he learned from, but Socrates never wrote. And there was something in that was consistent with his philosophy, because you couldn't just write down the truth and then give it to somebody. They had to think it for themselves. They had to articulate it themselves. And so, emulating his master, Plato wrote dialogues. And many of those dialogues don't arrive at a nice, neat conclusion. He was rarely saying, this is what I think, or this is the truth. It was often different interlocutors, different people in the room, as well as the reader, that would sort of nudge the conversation in a different direction and reveal different perspectives. Like I said, that idea that we all carry around with us habits of thought, prejudices, ideas that we probably arrived at a certain point in our lives without really knowing where they came from. And so that was part of that process for me of starting to recognize that by reading Plato's dialogues. Aristotle's helpful because he writes treatises. He also wrote dialogues. Unfortunately, we lost all those. The other thing about Aristotle is most of his writings are actually notes of his students, and I would hate to be known throughout history based on the notes of my students. But he does sort of create this more straightforward answer to questions. But both of them were talking about virtue, which for me as an athlete resonated because I was always interested in getting better in human excellence. And so when I was getting good at something, I looked at people who were better and wanted to be like them. When I came to that moment where I chose education over cycling, similarly, I gravitated toward the best people I could find, the most interesting people, the most dedicated people, the people who seem to have intrinsic motivation. And that really fueled me and helped me move forward in a way that was less transactional and more transformational, where I wasn't going to school for the grades as much as I was going to learn, because I was surrounding myself with people who were interested in ideas rather than just getting a degree or just getting a title or earning money, which all of those things are important. We need extrinsic motivations. But I had a lot of intrinsic motivation as a result of the people I had around me as an undergrad.
Got it. And you mentioned Aquinas, Augustine. Do you still yourself do you investigate the religious Catholic structure much this day, or are you still more interested in the Greek philosophers and the other types?
I mean, the questions still answer me. I'm less interested in sort of contemporary manifestations of religion, although I do find, I was just listening to The Hidden Brain the other day where they were talking about sort of the role of religion in the human brain and how that seems to be a common thread throughout human history. So I think it is important to think about maybe traditions that we've lost, what we might have lost without having those now. We live in a world where change is so rapid, we rarely are able to develop new traditions. But sometimes the old traditions don't serve us the way they might have in the past. And so I do find it important to continue to engage in those thoughts. I don't always find contemporary discussions around those ideas helpful, which is maybe why I read ancient philosophy or maybe limit it to my own reflections. When we think about some of the practices that no longer serve us, it's almost as if we were moths navigating by the stars, and now we have lights. And those lights are actually a hindrance to us rather than helping us see better. And so being able to connect for myself in a world of ideas that I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions, but I appreciate the striving for answers and the pursuit of meaning in life.
Great. And so now that we know a little bit more about your interest in ideas more generally, moving from cycling to education, that has led you now to, you're moving into a position at the Center for Innovation Leadership at Johns Hopkins University as an Associative Director.
Exactly.
So how's that been?
Amazing. I was working in startups throughout, say 2015 through COVID, and that was very empowering. It really got me over a kind of perfectionism that I had, because you have to perform very quickly, get a minimum viable product. Ideas can happen in the morning. You might have a splash page up that evening, right? And you can't perfect it. You have to really execute. And that was helpful for me. It also allowed me to work with innovative thinkers in other areas, other walks of life that I didn't have knowledge in. What I found that the skills I had as a teacher, being able to capture an idea, especially from maybe someone who's an expert in something, and then share it with non-experts, was a real skill that I had developed, as well as facilitating ideas with teams of developers or cross-functional teams. But I found when COVID hit, like a lot of folks, I had a chance to kind of reflect on what I was doing, where I wanted to go. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been there for 20 years. My family's here in Maryland. My parents are in Annapolis. I have 4 older sisters. I have 10 nieces and nephews. And when I got to this moment in COVID where I couldn't fly home like I was used to, but I was calling home a lot more and really finding myself connected with them, I went back to teaching at Arizona State University. I was teaching student success, and found a lot of my creative problem-solving skills that I used in entrepreneurship were really helpful for students in trying to navigate college. And I knew I wanted to stay there, but go further in a way that allowed me to continue supporting programming as well as engaging with faculty. So I made the switch to the staff side from teaching. I became a success coach at Hartwick College, and then I came to Hopkins as a success coach in the Center for Student Success and the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences. It was extremely gratifying working with first-gen limited income students. We have need-blind admissions at Hopkins based on the Bloomberg gift that allows us to accept students not based on their ability to pay, but based on their talent and their ambition and their drive. And being able to help students who maybe don't come from a family who's had that experience, or even maybe a neighborhood or a community that doesn't send a lot of students to college, was something that really helped me connect with what I was talking about before, that sort of obligation I felt based on sort of my father's success and the benefits I enjoyed there. Seeing so much around leadership formally in research, but also informally just in how people work at Hopkins, kind of got me thinking more and more about what I could contribute to the idea of leadership, particularly in higher education, which is a very slow-moving, slow-to-change sort of institution. And I found the Center for Innovative Leadership within the Carey Business School, and that was sort of ideal situation for me because it's a small center within a much larger structure, but it allows me to be nimble. It allows me to use some of those skills I developed in the startup as well as in the classroom, because I'm supporting programming, I'm supporting faculty research, and I'm engaging with entrepreneurs like you out in the community here in Baltimore and hopefully across the globe. So that was an incredible find for me. I started as a business program manager in December, and I'm now taking on a new role as the Associative Director.
Amazing. So in 2015, when you were first getting started with the startups,
Yes,
did you take a founder position, or were you more of like a consultant type?
I was the Executive Director of Education.
Okay, so that's where you started more generally working with a bunch of different startups.
Well, it was with a particular startup. So I was working at a very well-funded, excellent, well-run private independent day school, and that got me into the community in Phoenix. A lot of the parents were business owners and people who were very successful in walks of life that I wasn't familiar with. I mentioned before I got into sort of design thinking for education, working on the curriculum there, but I saw the potential to use those skills within a startup. So my first startup was working with small business owners and entrepreneurs to educate them and support them in engaging with 501c3s or charities within their community in order to help their branding and their connection to the community, as well as what we saw was it increased employee retention and a sense of mission to their work if they had a charity that they were supporting, a connection to the community within their business through volunteerism or donating. And because I was an educator, it was my job to create the education component for that, both in person and through an online program that we developed.
Mm-hmm. And throughout that process, what do you think is the least expected thing that you encountered? You know, you have a long history of engaging with the new ideas and working in leadership positions, helping startups. What was the least expected thing?
How hard it is to be a founder. I really appreciate and respect the people who take on that risk. I take a very broad definition of entrepreneurship, and I think it's not fair to entrepreneurs because the key element for entrepreneurship is risk and taking on often a disproportionate amount of risk maybe than what's immediately available in terms of reward. And understanding the pressure that they feel, especially when they have someone on their payroll like me or other employees, or to their customers when they're not sure exactly if the product's going to work, how it's going to work, how they're going to deliver it, what it's going to look like. All of those sorts of things that goes into running a business I didn't appreciate at the time. And I learned to really have respect for entrepreneurs. What I share with entrepreneurs is a frustration with the status quo. I look at things and I think, boy, there's got to be an easier way. There's got to be a better way to do this. And that's what entrepreneurs see. They see something that no one else sees, a process, a service, or a product that could solve a problem for somebody. And much of my ideas around entrepreneurship and leadership have to do with problem solving. So I went in it with that mindset, but really getting to look behind the curtain of what they had to sweat on a day-to-day basis. That was not glamorous. That wasn't sort of being the successful entrepreneur that many of us think of when we think of, people who've hit it big with their own ventures. It really is an incredibly vulnerable position to put yourself in, to put yourself out there as a founder, to introduce yourself to people and say, I have something that can solve that problem for you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, no, I absolutely, I think that is certainly the hardest thing in my experience of being a founder, the risk. It's like my risks as a young entrepreneur look maybe a bit different from those who may be a bit more seasoned. I don't have anybody on payroll, but some risks that I encounter every day are, when we're trying to think about how we're going to develop our app, our first initial MVP, those development costs can go upwards of like $50,000-$70,000. And finding an actual market that's willing to pay, it's a very scary thing. And you can do a bunch of interviews, but until you have the actual physical product and people use it, that's the huge risk. But also another risk is like, I'm staying down here over the summer. I don't spend as much time with my family and friends as I used to. So I'm risking like personal relationships for this effort. Those who are working with me on my projects, I feel a responsibility to them to provide an experience over the summer that's educative and that they will benefit from. So it's not a payroll, but it's an actual valuable experience. So tons of risk around every corner. How do you figure out whether a risk in the entrepreneurial realm is worth taking?
It's a great question. It's something that I have encountered in different situations, because you're right, there are all kinds of risks, and especially maybe the most valuable is time. And what you just mentioned, that you're devoting your attention to this. So anytime we say yes to something, we're invariably saying no to something else, right? This was something I experienced when I was training and competing at a very high level in cycling, because I wasn't going out on Friday night, Saturday night. I wasn't, cultivating the kinds of relationships that maybe people do in college, because I was very focused on getting up at dawn, getting on my bike, and I was exhausted at the end of the day, and I was traveling to races. So I was very cognizant of what I was not enjoying as a result of doing this thing that I loved. And maybe that was part of the reason why at a certain point I decided it was time for a shift, because I realized, I was missing out on certain things. For me, I felt like I was missing out on developing my brain, frankly, because I really was surprised about how much I enjoyed college when I did go to class. But for you and being able to say, is this risk worth it? One of the great things about being young is you think you can take on the world. And the truth is you can. And you have this kind of risk in time. You also have reputational risk, right? If you spend yourself in one thing, you get known for that sort of thing. You want to do it in a certain way and be consistent with your values, so that when people see you, even if the venture isn't successful, the next place where you are, they're going to say, oh, Mark does what he says he does. He's a person of his word, and I trust him, right? That's important. So for me, assessing risk maybe doesn't have to do with as much financial payoff, but with personal growth. Is it something that can take me to where I want to be in terms of who I want to become? Not necessarily what I want to do, but what kind of life do I want to lead? Is it something that will allow me to continue to build my network, to continue to grow, and to continue to hone new skills? Because that's the thing that I think is true of the future of work, is that we're not going to end up at a company for 40 years, get a gold watch at the end, and retire. We're all sort of entrepreneurs now. We all have personal brands we have to develop. We all have to sort of pivot when one thing is changing. The job that you have in 10 years probably doesn't exist, right? And so thinking through what allows me to keep as many doors open as possible when I enter a decision about whether a risk is worth it is something that I think about. The other thing, though, as an entrepreneur, is sometimes you have to put the blinders on and just go for it. You're not going to leave any doors open. You want to burn the boats at the shore so you can't think about returning home, right? And that's the tension. And I think the more that you can allow yourself to maintain the reputation you want, to maintain the values that you have, and to have an end goal that isn't necessarily tied up in the success of your business, but in the success of your process, then the risk is mitigated somewhat.
If you're enjoying the content so far, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to stay up to date with any of our future notifications. So, have there been any opportunities that you have taken and they didn't work out, but like you're saying, on the other end, you've grown as a person? Anything like that in your past?
Many. One that comes to mind is over 15 years ago now, I was in a PhD program, and I was fully committed, gave everything to that, and really, as we were saying before, making personal sacrifices in order to be able to do this thing when many of my friends were already out in their fields, making good money, those sorts of things. But I went back to school and I was working on my PhD, and then came a moment where I finished my coursework, but I was having a tough time getting going on writing my dissertation. My committee, 3 of the 4 members left the school where I was, went to other schools, so I needed to reform a committee. I was also at a point in my personal life where I said, I'm really not having fun talking to other experts about these very specific things. Part of being, earning a PhD is you get to know more and more about less and less. And I had an opportunity to teach high school and be a founding faculty member at a new charter school. And I decided to do that, thinking, well, maybe I'll finish the dissertation while I'm teaching or something. And of course, that didn't happen. But I fell in love with teaching. And even though I didn't finish that PhD, which I put a tremendous amount of work into, I still got a lot out of that experience. I still continued to maintain those relationships, those connections, but more importantly, it led me to a place where I was much more comfortable being a high school teacher than I would have been if I had just gone into it after my master's. And that failure was something that allowed me to think about, what did I not like about my own educational experiences that I could now bring to this new high school classroom, particularly in a new school which didn't have some of the other traditions or habits that more established schools had. And that really allowed me to teach in a way that gave the students a voice. I was more of a seminar leader than a lecturer. That was very important to me. And that continued throughout the process. Now, today, I'm back in earning my doctorate in the School of Education here at Johns Hopkins, and there are plenty of evenings and weekends where I think, gosh, I wish I would have finished this 15 years ago. However, I'm now re-engaging with folks and thinking through these ideas in ways I couldn't have thought about at that time in my personal development. Now that I've had some experience in the world around leadership, especially seeing brilliant faculty and being able to engage with their research on that, I'm grateful that I'm actually at this place in my life where I can return to the classroom, think through these ideas, and then execute them in ways I probably couldn't have before.
Mm-hmm. So I like what you said about, in a PhD program, you tend to learn more and more about less and less. It's clear that you've always been interested in the bigger ideas, leaving those doors open. How does someone practically leave those doors open to new ideas in their day-to-day lives, or maybe even with their careers? If someone's in a stable career as it is, or maybe working on a PhD program, how did, I guess, you keep yourself open to those ideas best?
Yeah, I think, well, part of it maybe it comes from a weakness of mine, right? I have a need to fully understand something before I can sort of find my niche and my place within solving that particular problem. So I don't work well in a box where I'm not sure what came before me or what's going to happen when I'm finished with this particular piece. So I approach it in that way. What that requires me to do, though, is to understand the vision of the institution that I'm working for, to embody the mission, as well as share it with other people so that we start to be able to talk about, well, why are we doing this, right? Not just we need to do this or we want to execute on this. For me, it always comes back to asking the why. Simon Sinek talks about, find your why, and once you have your why, the how becomes a lot easier. That's something that I continually return to as a kind of touchstone. So it's less important what I'm doing in whatever stage of my career I'm in, as long as I'm able to articulate the why. The more I do that with other people that I work with, the broader, I guess the more opportunities seem to happen for me, because they get what I'm up to, and they maybe come to me with a problem or ask me, to support them in something that is tangential to what my specific position is, but I'm happy to be open to those ideas. It also gives me empathy for other people and the struggles that they have with whatever they're working on within the organization that I'm a part of.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on those who might be inclined to maybe pigeonhole themselves on a particular topic? Those the PhDs, the extremely technically savvy. How might the entrepreneurial landscape look different for someone like who can do everything technically versus those who are better at leadership and the soft skills? Like, what comes to mind is a Wozniak and a Jobs. Like,
right.
That wouldn't have happened without the two of them there. But then I think of other technical founders. I think Gates, and Musk is very good with the physics and stuff too. But he seems to me to be more of a really good marketer and a leader. So what do you think is more valuable, or is the complementary skills, technical and softer leadership skills, is that a necessity for a good startup, or can someone who's technically brilliant potentially do it themselves?
It changes. There was a time when you had to be a coder to found a lot of the companies that people are looking for the services that they're providing and the software maybe that they're developing. It's not necessarily the case that you have to have that kind of technical expertise, but everything that you just mentioned, soft skills, leadership, physics, all of these can be learned. And so if you come with the mindset that I have technical knowledge and I have tremendous respect for people who are able to stay focused on a particular topic or issue, I think there's something tremendously valuable about developing expertise around a topic, knowing what it's like to master something. And that's important for leadership. You shouldn't expect to major in leadership and become a leader at a young age. You have to have some area of content that you're going to develop and go through those struggles with in order to appreciate what that's like. But once you have, say, if you're starting off from a technical position, maybe then thinking about being intentional and deliberate about what are the leadership skills that I want to develop, or who are the people that I gravitate toward as leaders, and how can I learn from them and become leaders. Similarly, if you have maybe stronger communication skills, presentation skills, connections with people, you want to develop your technical knowledge, and that'll be an important component of your leadership, because you have to be able to demonstrate competence to your team within leadership. We saw in leadership or in organizational theory, going back to Max Weber through today, there was this old hierarchy and hierarchical structure with managers, C-suite. In the mid 20th century, though, you started to see head of divisions, head of marketing, head of engineering. And these are people who are successful at doing the thing that they now led. That's not always a great way to go, because just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're good at helping others. You can imagine, I think about sometimes professors who are great researchers, brilliant in their field, but maybe not always great at remembering what it's like not to know how to solve an equation. And, being able to help other people see what you see is a real skill. So I don't think there's a preference there, and I don't think there's one over the other. I think recognizing that anything you want to do can be learned. You might have natural proclivities and things that come easy to you that you start with. Those are your strengths. But your strengths should reveal to you areas that you want to develop and how you want to support whatever it is you want to do, either as an entrepreneur or someone working within a larger organization.
Mm-hmm. So do you think there's an ideal direction maybe to go from someone who's technically savvy to a better leader versus someone who's a great leader, then trying to narrow in? Because my mentality is I study computer science and physics. And, my thing is if I'm in school, I have the access to all these different professors, and these are topics that are very strictly learned in textbooks, equations apply, this and that. And it's outside of the classroom that I'm able to develop the leadership skills. So I don't feel it particularly necessary to spend my time in undergrad as a communications major.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take? Is there an ideal direction going from soft to technical or technical to soft?
Again, you have to assess yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So in leadership development, oftentimes we start off with assessments of, could be a Myers-Briggs, could be Clifton Strengths. Those are not ends in themselves. I think they're only valuable as a beginning of a conversation or a way to start thinking about and reflecting on, okay, here's sort of my natural tendency. Maybe I'm introverted, or maybe I am good at communicating with other people, whatever it is. For me, though, you're going back to what does an organization need? I think there is something to be said for the visionary and the executor. And oftentimes, those are driven by personality types as well as technical knowledge. But I think in a healthy organization, there's an ebb and flow where people take turns in those roles. That is, you might have a visionary leader who's really pushing a team to fulfill his vision or her vision, but it's important to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with your team and execute as well, and maybe allow other people to take turns leading and developing those skills. I guess to answer your question, though, there is something to be said about, like I said before, mastering some area of expertise. So just having that experience, and it could be being an English major. It doesn't necessarily mean a technical STEM-focused area. But some place where you start to appreciate the tradition of whatever your discipline is, you see who is at the top of your discipline, how they got there, and you appreciate what they went through to get there. Those are all important things to have, I think, for anyone wanting to step into leadership. But some people have sort of those outgoing or maybe even not outgoing, but reflective qualities that make good leaders. But they should have some technical experience and understanding of what it means. For me, often, not surprisingly, as an educator, I think of leadership in terms of teaching oftentimes. And so if you find yourself like you are, maybe you're a little bit further along than some of your peers in one of these classes, right? And you're in Calc 2 and you're not really sweating it, but you see someone who is. Working with them is an act of leadership. It also allows you to work on those other skills. Probably also while refining your understanding. I always understand things better once I've taught them. And this is a common sort of theory of education and adult learning that you read it, you practice it, but then you teach it to someone else. Teaching for me is maybe the ultimate form of leadership, and I see it at work in not in the classroom exclusively, in all walks of life and different situations. So being able to master something, but then have the mindset that you're going to help other people, and you're ultimately going to do what leaders do, which is not cultivate followers, but you empower other people to become leaders themselves.
I love that. What would you say your expertise, the thing that you've mastered, is?
I guess what I have shown myself to do is kind of intellectual history. I guess when I taught history in high school, I wasn't a military person. I wasn't necessarily even a politics person. It was seeing where ideas collide and how those ideas made us think about society differently. One moment I had was understanding that Aristotle's physics saw things naturally at rest. And of course, Newtonian physics tells us things are naturally in motion. Well, there's a mindset with that where the ultimate goal for Aristotle was to become a philosopher where you were still and sort of not needing to move. And then, of course, for Newtonian physics, we're constantly in motion. As you know, we always have to improve things, get better at things, come up with the newer things. So these ideas that maybe seem distant from society when we talk about physics really do create a mindset for us. Or you think about the language we use when we use computer language to talk about, I'm going to be offline, or I don't have the bandwidth to do that. The technology and the knowledge that we have seeps into all aspects of our lives. So that's something that I've been able to see. The other thing, I guess, that I've used in startups, though, is facilitation. So because I taught as a seminar leader rather than a lecturer, I was able to develop psychological safety around my teams, make sure that people had voices, that they were heard, and that I was able to, as I said before, capture a vision, maybe from a very technical, brilliant person, and then be able to share it with non-experts. That's probably the chief skill that I have, I would say, that I brought. You'd be surprised how many second in commands in Silicon Valley and elsewhere were philosophy majors. And I think having that awareness of ideas and how those ideas change society or influence the way we think about ourselves and the way the world works is very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I didn't know that. Well, a fair number of second in charge or philosophy majors.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of my mentors in high school, he worked on Wall Street and I think he was at Morgan Stanley, whatever, but he led the Entrepreneurial and Investment Society at my high school, and he was a philosophy major. And I didn't know that until come graduation. I was like, that's really interesting. I'd imagine someone maybe doing computer science or whatever, but that's really cool. So before we wrap up, I'd like to talk just finally a little bit more about your current research.
Sure.
And I know we'd like to discuss the present moment leadership theory.
Yeah, so the present moment leadership theory is something that the Center for Innovative Leadership at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School is developing. Our founders, our faculty director, Chris Myers, our executive director, Mike Doyle, have this theory of present moment leadership that they have developed through their own leadership development teaching as well as their research. And it sort of is an outgrowth of situational leadership. So that present moment leadership focuses on three aspects that are always present within leadership, at least according to this theory: empathy, competence, and agility. What's unique about the way that this theory looks at leadership is that it says leadership is dynamic, it's not static, that it's determined by the context of the situation and the team you're leading rather than you or your leadership style, right? There are a lot of conversations about different styles of leadership: transformational, servant, authoritative, whatever it might be. But something that makes you successful in one context might not serve you or might even be detrimental in another context. Present moment leadership then looks at these three elements: empathy, competence, and agility, and says, these are essentially three things that you have to dial up or down depending on the situation, what demands of you. And so through a kind of mindfulness, self-awareness, leaders constantly ask themselves, what does this moment ask of me as a leader? A simple yet recurring question that helps us ground ourselves in what the context or the team needs rather than in what we naturally default to, right? I might find that I'm very much the kind of hands-on person who says, this is the way to do it. That kind of competence, right, what we're talking about, maybe I have the technical expertise, right? But there are a lot of times where if I let my team figure it out and I give them the space to fail and then learn from it, they'll be much stronger in the future. There might come a very, you think about a high reliability organization, aerospace, NASA, something like that, where people's lives are on the line and you need to give a correct answer right away. But if you're simulating situations, maybe you hold back and you don't tell your team what to do. You allow them to figure it out for themselves. Similarly with empathy, we always want to have empathy for those around us and what they need. But maybe the way that I show that empathy or I express it to them can be different depending on the situation. Maybe it's a moment where I can stop and just listen and allow someone to vent. Or it might be a place where I need to kind of have a hard deadline or have a pretty, a tough love conversation and say, this is what needs to happen. I know that teaching in COVID, our empathy dial was up to 11, right? As we came back to the classroom, it was important to have attendance policies maybe, or to have harder deadlines than we had before. So that COVID demanded of higher education and teachers, professors to really allow their students a lot of flexibility. Coming back to the classroom after COVID, maybe that flexibility goes away a little bit and you have to hold them to the deadlines. With agility, it always sounds great. I want to be agile. I want to be able to pivot in any moment. But leaders have to know when. Sometimes you have to stick to your guns and say, nope, this is what we're going to do. Other times you yield to that new information or to that failure and you say, yep, we're going to change course now. So present moment leadership allows leaders to take those three elements and think about, how am I showing empathy? How am I sharing my competence? And in what way am I going to stick to the mission we've agreed to, or am I going to maybe call an audible or change things in a way that addresses the needs of the moment?
So then, are there any shortcomings of the theory? I mean, it seems pretty comprehensive. I would agree that empathy, competence, and agility certainly require different dial turns depending on the situation. Are there any shortcomings or other research groups that have different theories? Maybe there's a case study that doesn't quite fit the present moment leadership model. Where might there be room for improvement?
There's always room for improvement. I think for me, the toughest thing when sharing this with people and helping people think through it is the ambiguity that it leaves on the table, because it doesn't give you short and fast answers to problems. It gives you ways of processing and thinking about them, right? It's not a manual that says, okay, so today I need to be extra empathetic. Tomorrow I need to dial it down a bit. Oh, high competency, right? It would be like learning to play the piano without ever touching keyboards, or learning to throw a football without ever going out into a game condition, right? Where the weather is different, people are coming at you. But I think the strength of it is that it does create an intentionality, so that, yeah, you can say, I'm emphasizing being an inclusive leader. I'm transformational in sharing a vision and helping my people think through how their mission and their particular task on the team is related to the overall purpose of my institution. Present moment leadership is only a tool. It's not going to tell you what to do in a particular moment, but it's going to help you be more aware of how you're making that decision.
Got it. Okay. Well, Judson, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for coming on. And we hope to have you maybe back in the future, and wish you all the best luck at your new position at the Center for Innovative Leadership.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just so happy to know that you're out there doing what you do, and go Hop.
Yep. Thanks, Judson.
Thank you.